Morning, everyone. Good to be with you. Things got pretty dicey on 691 outside of Meredith, so I'm glad to be here. I'm not sitting on the highway still. But this morning we are going to delve into the significant changes to the 2021 International Residential Code as it will be adopted for use in Connecticut. So I am a private citizen. I'm an architect, a licensed building official, an architectural practice and code consulting practice. So what you're hearing today are my opinions and views. This is nothing official from the state of Connecticut or any particular municipality. It's always a good idea to buy your own copy of the code and read it, at least the portions that apply to what you do, and not just take my word for it. A little bit about me, if you don't know who I am. Like I said, I'm an architect and licensed in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, and I do residential and commercial design since 1989. But I've also been a licensed building official in Connecticut since 1999, and I was the building official in the town of East Hartford for 10 years. So my practice kind of runs the gamut of doing my own design work, but also then being a code consultant to other architects, engineers, municipalities, real estate developers. There are certain towns that, especially for large commercial projects, want outside experts to review the plans instead of the building department or the fire marshal's office. And so I'm often hired to do that or do special inspections in certain towns as well. And I've been a member of the AIA National Codes and Standards Committee, and at times I sit on various code development committees for the International Code Council. So when the code changes take place on the actual book itself, there are committees that I sit on, different ones from the existing building code, the energy code, or the international building code itself to assess those changes. So I'm just like you guys. These are some of the projects designed over the years or built. And today's deal is, and the screen here may be a little dicey as far as what you can be able to see. You don't have to take copious notes today, okay? Because if Maria has your email from when you registered for this program, or you can throw your business card or leave your email address up here for me. We'll make sure that you get a PDF of these slides. Okay, it'll come to you within the next few days. And my business card's over there. You can also just grab a business card and send an email to me asking for the slides. If you email me about the program, just be sure you put in the subject line, it's the Rings End seminar you're writing about, so I don't lose the email and think it's something else. Okay, so the objectives today are to look at the significant changes in the Connecticut state amendments that affect the International Residential Code. So what I think is significant and what you might think is significant may be two different things. There have been a lot of changes because this is a 6-year jump. So right now we have in Connecticut the 2015 International Residential Code. International Code Council publishes new codes every 3 years. So we will be skipping the 2018 edition, which means all those changes already happened. We're in that book. And now we're getting to 2021 with all kinds of other changes. Okay, so you got 6 years worth of 2 code change cycles worth of changes that are going to be in the residential code. That's hundreds of changes throughout the code. Some are small editorial things that aren't really a technical change. Others can be significant technical changes. So I have to go through that, kind of call out what I think is going to be of value to you in today's program, but we're not going to cover every change that's in the code. Okay, just so you're aware of that. So here's the deal. The objective of the state of Connecticut was that effective October 1st, we would have a 2022 Connecticut State Building Code, and it will comprise all of these documents. And you see highlighted there the 2021 IRC, because that's really what we're going to talk about today mostly. There's a new one that's introduced into Connecticut, the 2021 International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, ISPSC. So just so you know, any information about swimming pools, spas, and hot tubs has now been pulled out of the residential code of the building. Because the International Code Council back in 2012 started publishing a separate code book for swimming pools, called the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, and Connecticut this time is adopting it. And there's a lot of changes there. So if you in any way have anything to do with swimming pools or pool barriers, fences around pools, a lot of changes. Okay, we can't go into them today. No time. That was a separate 3-hour program we did for building officials a couple of months ago. So whenever you get cited for a violation from a local building official, it will say the 2021 International Residential Code portion of the 2022 Connecticut State Building Code. That's how we in Connecticut will refer to this code. By the way, how many code officials do we have here today? All right, we've got a few, and architects, engineers, and designers. How about the guys that actually do the work? Okay, great. We got a nice mix today. Okay, so here's the latest and greatest. You say, holy cow, what's today's date? This is, what is it? 21st. October 1st, that's right around the corner. So here's the problem. The state of Connecticut hasn't quite finished the official review of these amendments. There's a body called the Legislative Regulatory Review Committee, and they are meeting on the 26th. And it's supposedly at that meeting they will be giving the green light to the state building inspector and the state fire marshal to go ahead and adopt this code. Now, last week I got an email from high up at the state building inspector's office and said, "Oh no, we're focused on October 1st, and if we get the go ahead on the 26th, you know, it's October 1st." And I just got an email yesterday from someone at the state fire marshal's office saying, "I don't think so, because even if they give us the green light, there won't be the time to officially notify everybody that's got to be notified." So maybe it's going to be October 1st, maybe it's going to be November 1st. Don't want to tell you. It's coming. So here's the thing, though. I mean, and this can be a little bit of a pain for we architects or any contractors, anybody here, if you don't know what code you're going under October 1st. What's important is the date of your application. It doesn't matter when the permit gets issued. So, you know, if you're putting in for permit applications now, they're not, even though they may issue the permit in 30 days, the permit will not have anything to do with the new code, okay? It always has to do with the date of your application. So if the date of your application is on or after the effective date of the code in Connecticut, then you're under the new code. For residential work, it shouldn't be too big a deal. However, if it is a big deal for you, if there's a hardship that you're going to wind up with because of the adoption of something new that either you didn't know about or you didn't have a way of anticipating, the state does accept for a few months code modifications to allow a project, even that's permitted or applied for after the date of adoption of the new code, to still use the old code or certain provisions of the old code. Okay. So they're always open to doing that. A lot of times they wind up doing that for larger commercial projects that may have already been long in the works, got their zoning approvals, their historic approvals, and if there's something in the building code that would have made them have to go backwards and change things or significantly change things, you know, they're open to issuing code modifications for that. This is a website that the state has where you can follow the code adoption process, and this will change. Once the new code's adopted, then the same website will then start running the clock and the process for the next code. And it's my understanding that they plan to adopt the 2024 international codes. So that would probably happen, you know, at best maybe in 2025. But you'll be able to follow the process. You can put in your email here. It'll be on an email list if you want to get updates when they have meetings and such to discuss the code changes. You can go to that website and download now the Connecticut State Amendments. The state has a PDF that has the amendments for all of those codes that we listed that are being adopted in Connecticut, the IRC being one of them. So, and the latest that's available is the one that's dated April 20th, 2022, because that's the one that went for that legislative regulatory review. Okay, so if in that regulatory review they made some minor changes to language, and usually that has to do with sort of the legalese part of the code. They don't deal with the technical stuff, but the legalese, then maybe there'll be some adjustments to certain provisions. But this really should be the content of the amendments in the state. Eventually, because this is kind of happening in the last minute, eventually the International Code Council will be publishing a Connecticut edition of the IBC and the IRC. They don't publish Connecticut editions of all the other codes, but they will be. When that happens, the last time we had a code change, it was like 3 months, I think it took, before the International Code Council had them available for purchase or download from their website. So you're going to be stuck for a while, just either referencing back to this PDF with all the amendments and seeing, looking back and forth, or marking up a copy of the model code so that you have something to refer to. So this is the book here that we will be adopting, the International Residential Code 2021 version. Now, what's helpful, and costs you a few extra dollars, but what is helpful is that every time the International Code Council has a change in codes, they publish a significant change. So there's for every edition. So there's already available for purchase by download or I don't know if they have paper copies, but at least for download. The 2018 significant changes and the 2021 significant changes. Each book is about 300 pages. And the code book itself is about 900 pages. So that's why I said before, what I think are significant changes are obviously not with the International Code Council. It's significant because they just built a book with all kinds of changes. The other nice thing, though, is if you look at these books, especially if something really is going to affect you, and you want to kind of know the details of it today, because we can't go in great depth on these changes today. These books explain why the change occurred, what the reasoning was behind it, and a lot of times there's a lot of pictures and details and drawings or photographs that kind of explain why the change took place as well. So they are valuable resources. And if any of you think that the International Code Council writes code, they don't. It's actually people like you that write the content of the code. So you can only blame yourselves for either being involved or not being involved. The International Code Council essentially hosts the changes, but it's on a 3-year code development cycle where there are all kinds of huge meetings. So the ones pictured here is a code hearing, a public action code hearing for the International Residential Code, where you'll have about 900 people in the room. And they're code officials, they're manufacturers, they're representatives of large real estate development companies, all kinds of people that have an interest in the codes, architects, engineers. The only voting members are code officials that are authorized to represent their municipalities or their jurisdictions. So, it's not Anderson Window getting to vote and throw, forward a code change that just suits them. There's a lot of vetting that goes on with code change proposals. But this cycle happens with all of those codes pictured over there in the upper right every 3 years. It's a very arduous process. If you want to go to ICC's website, This is their site, codes.iccsafe.org, and that's where you can read. They have read-only public access to the codes, or you can subscribe, and then you have full access to be able to print and download and be able to make better use of the codes, or you can buy the codes at this site on ICC's website. Also, for those of you who aren't aware of this, there's an upstart that's been around for a few years called UpCodes. And they decided that, gee, once a state or a city adopts a code book, it's now law. And law is supposed to be free to the American public. So, to the chagrin of the International Code Council and National Fire Protection Association and a bunch of other people, UpCodes publishes full text of the codes adopted everywhere in the United States, pretty much at this point, with the amendments in it. So if you go right now to this site, you would see the current codes. As I show here, you can pick one, and for free, they already have all the Connecticut amendments inserted in the code. They don't have the new one up yet, because it's probably going to take them time to put it together too, and maybe they're going to wait until there's a final version out to bother doing that. But eventually, it's going to wind up on this site, and this has free access. You can pay a very reasonable subscription price that gets you better usability of the site, but you can still read the codes here for free. Okay, let's start to get into code changes. So the first one is in the IRC itself, in section chapter 1 of the IRC is the administrative chapter. That's sort of the rules of the road. What building officials are authorized to do, their role and responsibilities, how you go about applying for a building permit, how inspections are conducted, all of that stuff. What a building official has to do if he wants to cite you for a code violation or you're doing work without a permit, all of that stuff is in chapter 1. And so it's heavily amended by the state of Connecticut to follow the regulations and the statutes here in Connecticut. This change here happens to be one from the model code itself in the IRC, and it has to do with additions, alterations, or repairs. And the basic rule that's in the code now, the language, and you can see it sort of in the middle of the paragraph there, it says additions, alterations, repairs, and relocations shall not cause an existing structure to become unsafe or adversely affect the performance of the building. That's very big. You know, whether or not whatever you're doing to alter an existing house is going to adversely affect the performance of that structure. And that's subject to a lot of interpretation, right? Building official may think one thing, you think something else, the architect thinks something else, the homeowner thinks something completely different. So they're changing and being much more specific with the language. Instead, it's going to say, additions, alterations, repairs, and relocations shall not cause an existing structure to become less compliant with the provisions of this code than the existing building or structure was prior to the addition, alteration, or repair. So if you think about this, let's say we have a house, let's say a ranch, a single-story house built in the 60s, okay? We don't touch it. We just look at that house and we can compare it to the provisions that are in the building code today. How compliant or out of compliance is that house? And probably in a lot of ways, it's out of compliance, right? Maybe today it wouldn't meet up with the wind load requirements, there's not sufficient wall bracing, whatever it might be. Maybe the rafters, you know, wouldn't carry the loads that are in the load tables today. Whatever it might be. So let's say the homeowner hires you to put a second floor on the house. And it may seem like a simple enough thing. Okay, I'm going to take some of this roof off, I'm going to put floor joists, floor trusses on it. I'm going to build a second floor. You know, the only load I'm really adding is the bed load, the weight of that structure, and some other 30 pounds per square foot on the second floor for the bedrooms. Big deal. Okay. However, let's compare that house again to how out of compliance it might be with the code today, and versus now that you put a second floor on it, is it more out of compliance? Well, the answer might be yes, because I've made a bigger sale, I've got more wall and roof exposed to the wind. So am I just plunking a second floor on it, or am I also looking at wall bracing, opening up sheetrock and doing wall bracing on the first floor? Headers, changing headers out on the first floor, they can't carry the extra load of the second floor, they plunk down over openings. Whatever it might be, that's where this will now sort of alert a building official, well, it may not be that simple, especially a vertical addition on a house. You may have to look at more, and you may want to tell your clients, this is going to make the rest of your house possibly less compliant with the code. We're going to have to do things to it to at least keep it where it's at now.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's going to make that determination?
It just says it shall be. Right. This is so it's up to the building official to ask the question. And then it's going to have to be probably up to the designer, architect, engineer to answer the question. And then, you know, you see the next sentence here, it says an existing building together with its additions shall comply with the height limits of this code. And what's the height limit of the International Residential Code? 3 stories. 3-story structures. If you're a 4-story house, you weren't built, or you're not to be built under the International Residential Code, you're to be built under the International Building Code. Basically what we call it, like commercial. Okay. So you can't put an addition, a vertical addition that's going to exceed the limits of the residential code, let alone whatever the height limits are for zoning, which oftentimes are less, lower than actual what the building code would allow. Okay, now let's look at some Connecticut amendments, state-specific amendments. So in section R105, that's the heading of that section is permits. And that's where it starts out by telling you, you need a permit to do anything on the building, anything, pretty much. And then there's a very specific list after that of work that's exempt from a permit. Very specific things. And so number 6 on that list are sidewalks, driveways, and on-grade concrete or masonry patios not more than 30 inches above adjacent grade. That's always been the case. You do a patio outside somebody's house, the sidewalk, whatever, you don't need a permit, a building permit to do that, okay? However, they've now added the language not requiring guards and not over any basement or story below, which are not part of an accessible roof. So the issue of not requiring guards might mean, let's say I've got a sidewalk and it's running alongside, right close to a retaining wall. And therefore, it's that sidewalk is more than 30 inches above the adjacent grade at the bottom of that retaining wall. The IRC says you need a guard. So for that length of walkway that's above 30 inches of the adjacent grade, that would be that piece of the sidewalk or patio or whatever. Okay. So that's the point of adding that language there. In section R15.2, number 7, item number 7 that's exempt from the permit. Yes.
Back to where you were just talking about that change with putting in the guards. Is there something somewhere that says if I'm more than 2 feet, 10 feet, or 20 feet away from that cliff or drop, I don't have to have the guards?
Yeah,
or
actually,
300 feet away,
there's no change. There's no change to that. The code says now that if you're 2 feet away, you don't need a guard.
So anything more than 2 feet, not required.
Correct. Yeah. But you know, if the walkway's here, it's sort of like coincides with the top of a retaining wall. You're going to have a guard. So put some shrubbery between your walkway and the wall. Okay, so item number 7 of work exempt from the permit currently says painting, papering, tiling, carpeting, cabinets, countertops, and similar finished work not involving structural changes or alterations. So they've added the term new construction. So Here's the thing, and this is something that a lot of towns winds up being a debate between contractors and building officials as to what's included in a permit. So let's say I'm renovating a house. And so we turn in the plans for the renovation. And part of it is there's a remodeled kitchen, remodeled bath. And so there's cabinets, right? And there's floor finishes in those areas that are new. And so the building official says, okay, you know, how much is the project? Because that's what we base our building permit fee on. And you say it's $100,000. And he goes, okay, you know, can I see your estimate for that or your quote? And so you turn it in and he looks down through and he says, oh, I see on the plan that you're putting in new floors, new tile, and you got all new cabinets. I don't see those in the list on your costs. You go, oh, I don't need permits for those. Those are exempt because of item number 7. And some towns have naively bought into that. And it's never been true. And this is trying to reinforce the fact that it's not true. Okay. On their own, homeowner calls up and says, I want a new floor. I want you to, replace the floor. Flooring contractor, does he go get a permit to put in new hardwood floors and new tile floor? On its own, it doesn't need a permit. If it's part of another project, a renovation project, it's included. This is the point. It's included. Okay, you don't get to yank that stuff out. Cabinets, someone wants to replace their cabinets, they call a cabinet shop, they can come in and change out the cabinets. Don't need a permit. The only things they would need a permit for is if, in the course of doing that, now they're monkeying with the plumbing or monkeying with the electrical. But the cabinets themselves don't need a permit. But if we're doing a kitchen remodel or any other thing where now we're moving stuff around and we're changing things, and it's more of a project, there's drywall involved, there's some framing, whatever, it's part of new construction, it's included. Okay. So standing alone, they can be exempt, but not if they're part of overall alterations. Yes.
What about the dollar value of the cabinets? Is that included in the dollar value of the permit?
Yep. You're seeking, just like the value of the studs are included. Yep. Materials and labor.
Even though the cabinets are not required to have a permit.
I just said they are required if they're part of a project. Yeah. This is a change in Connecticut in section 105.314, basically to alert the building official more than you folks that if there's anything that's going to affect, if a project or a permit in any way is going to affect the performance of or require a reduced pressure backflow preventer, a double check valve assembly, or a pressure vacuum breaker on a project, that they have to notify the local water authority and get okay from them before permits are issued or COs or certificates of occupancy are issued. The only time that this might come into play would be probably if, let's say, you were putting residential sprinklers in a house voluntarily, or maybe an irrigation system. And here's a fun one, 105.51. This has been law in Connecticut for about 5 years now, but it's just being put into the code now, so that everybody is aware of it, instead of just people that bother to look at what happens in the legislature. But this 9-year closure law says that nine years from the date of issuance of a building permit for construction or alteration of a one-family dwelling, two-family dwelling, or structure located on the same parcel, for which construction or alteration, a certificate of occupancy has not been issued, that a building permit shall be deemed closed. So let's look at an example of this. Let's take that one-story ranch house built in the 60s. Okay, so you're getting hired to put this vertical addition, put a second floor on part of the house or all of the house, and they got this real sexy finished basement. I mean, it's a beautiful home theater down there, and all this electrical hidden behind walls. Everything is nice and sheetrock, the new floor. They put a bathroom down there. It's really, really nice finished basement. And they took out a permit to do it 12 years ago and had a contractor do it and had electrical contractor, plumbing, whatever. One problem, they never bothered to call for inspections, or they got some inspections, they got rough inspections, the contractor never bothered to call for a final inspection and get a certificate of approval. So, you know, it's just sort of sitting there, the contractor got paid, said, see ya, he's gone 12 years ago. And now you come along. Well, before this rule was, you know, building department was like, ooh, wait a minute, you know, that permit was never closed out. We want to do our inspections if that work is done and get it closed out, or find what problems there are on site and get it fixed. And you're saying, shoot, you know, I'm responsible for a second floor, not what's in the basement. And the homeowner, maybe it's even a different homeowner at this point. They're like, well, we bought it this way. Didn't matter, you bought the violation. So all this is saying, this law is, building department, for that work, that there was a permit issue, regardless of whether there were or weren't inspections, if it was never approved, the building department cannot chase it. They cannot, you know, go back and say, we want to do final inspections, make you fix stuff. It's deemed closed. It's not deemed approved, it's deemed closed. They just literally close that permit. They'll probably put a note in the file or their system that says no inspections done, just deemed closed because of the 9-year rule. And that's it. However, let's say that homeowner took out a building permit to finish the basement and then decided they wanted to put a bathroom down. Or they decided they're putting in recessed lights and stuff like that, and they did it themselves, or they hired a contractor and they had a lot of electrical work and plumbing work done down there. They got a building permit, but they didn't get a plumbing and electrical permit. The building permit will get closed. But now, if there was no open permit for the electrical or the plumbing work, they're stuck with having done work without a permit, and that's a violation. So it has to do with open permits. You're not getting a pass on anything you did 9, 10, 11 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago that was done without a permit. Okay. So just keep that in mind. That doesn't give you a pass for that, but it does make life simple for lenders and sellers of houses and whatnot, that if they have open permits and they're old, they just get closed. Information on construction documents. So in chapter 1, like I said, this is sort of the rules of the road. In section 107, that's where it talks about what needs to be on the drawings and the specifications for a house or any building. What we've always known, what the code has always said is, you got to give scale to scale drawings. They got to be on something readable for the building department, and they have to explain in detail how they comply with what's required in the building code. This is what's being added, this language in red. When the quality or arrangement of materials is essential for conformity to this code, specific information shall be given to establish such quality or arrangement, and this code shall not be cited or terms such as legal, per code, or their equivalent used as a substitute for specific information. This language actually used to be in the Connecticut building code until late 2005, and it got dropped out when we made a major code change in Connecticut. It's being put back in, and here's the reason. Because a lot of times we see on drawings, especially maybe smaller projects, someone's doing a deck. There's a little set of stairs shown on the deck plan, and it says stairs to code, guardrail per the section of the code, handrail per code, code compliant, such and such. And maybe the building official knows that you know the code, so he's not going to worry about it. But otherwise, he has no way of proving you know what the code actually says. This is saying, you can't put that language on a set of plans. You can't just say it's going to comply with the code. It's code compliant, per code, whatever, or even cite the section of the code. If that's the only explanation you give on how that's going to comply. Showing a handrail, well, you better state what the grip size is, how high off the nosings it's going to be. Is it going to return, you know, to the middle post of the wall? They want you to describe in detail how it complies with the code and not just fall back on the crutch of saying per code. Yes.
So how does this make anything easier for the building inspector or the builder or the homeowner? You try to get a permit, make it work on
Who said the intent was to make it easier?
We've seen for years stuff that says we don't mind to a specific section. You don't have to pay somebody, $2,000 to do all these extra drawings. Which if I know that the person submitting the plans is aware of the requirements, I see that on the plan. I don't see why that's a problem. Personally.
If you know that they know what they're talking
They
about.
didn't guess at it, they came up with it from somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's on the plan, it's on the plan. It's the right code section, you don't want to see the problem.
Well, the problem is, I mean, and you're probably citing one instance, right, where that may apply, but there's plenty of times where people don't know. They just say code compliant per code. It's the way they've always done it, and they think that that complies with the building code, and it doesn't.
There are specifics. There might be a code data sheet. There might be all kinds of information that talks about specific sections. That should be record.
So, and remember, for our purposes today, we're talking about the international residential code. This language will also be in the international building code. So all projects, it'll apply to all projects. Bottom line is, you don't just cite the code and say code compliant, whatever it is. Okay, you show it. Yes.
Discussion about doing education in contractor rental placing that, because that, I know it's not. See how they have this, to maintain a license, I know New York requires continuing ed, and others not, obviously, continuing ed. Wouldn't that sort of cover this a little bit and sort of suggest that they had to have a certain amount of continuing ed on
So,
and
you're-
therefore be able to cite codes and have them?
It's a very good point. Architects and engineers in Connecticut are licensed. Our contractors licensed. At least electrical, plumbing, they are licensed. But a general contractor, the remodeler, the home improvement contractor, is he licensed? What is he? Registered. What's the difference? There's no competency test. There's no level of competency required other than your ability to write a check to be a home improvement contractor. So that's why in other states like Massachusetts, there actually is a minimum competency. Shoot, my brother-in-law moved to Tennessee 15 years ago. Arduous requirements to be a remodeling contractor. To build a deck down in Tennessee, you go to school. You don't do that up here. Connecticut, really. It's kind of backwards, but North Carolina, some of those other states have really stringent requirements, including, how much collateral you have. You have to have a certain limit of insurance, and they really get into it. Connecticut could care less, and they don't care that you're incompetent until something really falls down and they pull your registration.
How would this apply to mechanical, plumbing, and electric? Is that?
Well, because they do get classes.
And
So, like an E1 electrical contractor, he does get he has to be recertified and go to classes.
But they don't have to do drawings of every outlet location, show you the right location for a switch or right side off the door or just.
Well, won't that be interesting? We'll have to see how that plays out, right? Because, a lot of times you see those quotes from electricians and it says, well, I'm going to wire your house per code. I'm going to give you the minimum required per code. Oh, what is that? Outlets every 12 feet, blah, blah, blah. Switches here and there. Oh. So we'll see how that plays out on the electrical side, but there's supposed to be specific information given to establish code compliance. Concrete documentation. This law came out of the crumbling foundations in the northeastern part of the state. Got one quarry with not so inert aggregate stone in that quarry, and that affected a very kind of small portion of the whole state. And regardless, now we have a law that says that the building official needs to know everywhere in Connecticut who poured the concrete and where did it come from. It has to have that information for 50 years. Not that it's going to do anybody any good 40 years from now. Here's a clarification. If you, let's say you're, most of the way through a project, even if it's a house, and you're really close, but there's a bunch of stuff that still needs to be done, but none of them are safety issues. And the family, they're under the gun. They need to move into the house. They need to move into a portion of the house. You got a functioning kitchen. I got one functioning bathroom. Maybe there's other bathrooms that aren't finished. There's other rooms that aren't finished, but there's enough that would meet the minimum habitability requirements of the building. So you go to the building official and you say, I'm sorry, but the family's got to move in, and all this portion of the house is code compliant, safe, and all I got to do is maybe some flooring work still, or painting stuff in that area, trim, and there's not much in the building code about that. So the building official says, yeah, no problem. I can see you doing that. I don't want to move into these rooms, but we can have a gentleman's agreement about that. I'll give you a TCO. Well, not so fast. And it may not affect so much residential as it will commercial. You don't just ask the building official. And this is alerting really building officials that you can't just go around issuing TCOs unless you also have zoning approval to do that. So let's say, someone wants to occupy a building and it's the start of winter, asphalt plants are closed, can't finish the parking lot, can't put in their driveway, can't establish the landscaping or things like that, maybe stuff that zoning is more interested in. And but they want to occupy the building or part of the building. And the building official might have said, oh yeah, don't worry about it. I know in the spring we'll clean that up when you come for a final, we'll get all that stuff done. And you can't do that unless zoning has agreed to that as well. Okay, so you need zoning approval for TCO and also for what's called a PCO, partial certificate of occupancy, to occupy part of the building. Okay. Here's one that's, we may spend a few minutes on this one. R301.1.3 engineer. So the language in black is what we've always known. So in the International Residential Code, there are plenty of tables for picking out what species, grade, and spacing of joist or rafter or ceiling joist I want to use, or studs, and build a house with it, right? But let's just say now, but in the basement, homeowner wants a steel beam down there because he wants very few posts. Or, they want longer spans, so we're going to use I-joists. We're going to use floor trusses. We're going to use LVL beams across the garage openings or anywhere in the house. None of that is in the International Residential, right? None of that information. You can't open up that book and see what size steel beam, what size LVL. It's not there. What size I-joist? Where are those? Those are with the manufacturers or steel fabricator. So the language we've always known is a couple lines down there. It says that these elements shall be designed in accordance with accepted engineering practice. So you as a contractor, you would go to Rings End or some other supplier of lumber, and you'd say, I want to use the micro lambs, whatever LVLs you want to use, branded LVLs you want to use, and I need a design. It's 12-foot opening in the kitchen. The room's so wide on this side, the room's so wide on that side. This is what I need. Maybe there's a story above it, maybe it's just a roof and an attic above it. And they input the information you give them into their software, and they come up with, here, you need two 12-inch LVLs. Here you go. And you give that to the building official, and you go, great. And you turn it into the building official, and he looks, okay, yeah, fine, go ahead. And that was it, you were done. So, no longer, because the language has now been added at the bottom, engineered design shall be certified by a registered design professional. So you can't waltz from the lumberyard to the building department with that printout unless somewhere in the path there was a design professional that said, yep, this works, this is good. Doesn't mean they have to design from scratch, but they have to certify that it was done according to accepted engineering practice and it's right. So, what is a registered design professional in Connecticut? Well, it's defined in the second chapter of the IRC. It defines a registered design professional as an individual who is registered or licensed by the Department of Consumer Protection pursuant to chapters 390, 391, 396, or 396A of the Connecticut General Statutes to practice their respective design profession. And this is my italics, acting within the scope of his or her license and practice discipline. So let's do a little process of elimination. Chapter 396A has to do with practice of interior designers. Interior designers are not authorized to do any structural work. Okay, so we'll eliminate that. This being applicable in this. Chapter 396 of the General Statutes has to do with the practice of landscape architects. Again, they're not going to design structural stuff in a house or a building, so we're going to cross that out. Chapter 391 is for the practice of professional engineers and land surveyors. Land surveyors are not authorized legally to do anything that's proposed. All they do is document what's there on the ground. So we eliminate that. Now we've got professional engineers. Okay. So does that mean, you know, any PE standard on a calculation for a beam is good? Not really, because it said acting within the scope of his or her license and practice discipline. So who get PE stamps in Connecticut? Civil engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, fire protection engineers, electrical, plumbing, did I get them all? And chemical engineers. Anybody that can pass the engineering exam gets that stamp. Okay. So, you know, should I get a beam calculation as a building department? Should I get a beam design that's stamped by a chemical engineer? No. Or an electrical engineer? Not if he didn't also take structural design while he was in school, or somehow he's developed the experience and how much that he feels confident to do it. But so that's where it requires ethics and professionalism on the part of that registered design profession, that engineer, to say, well, this is within the scope of my knowledge. I can certify this. Okay. What about architects? Chapter 390 has to do with licensed architects. Well, there's plenty of architects that do their own structural design. And if you look at the definition of the practice of architecture, it's as broad as the definition of the practice of engineering, including in the state statutes. It includes the structural factors of the building can be within the architect's purview. So there are plenty of architects that don't do their own structural design. They hire a structural engineer to do it, and they don't want to know anything about it. They want to deal with it. There are other architects who feel perfectly competent to design the structure. Maybe for simpler structures, maybe something more complex, they get a structural engineer for it. But there are plenty that can do that. So again, it would be, if an architect is going to certify the structural elements that are outside of the IRC on a particular project, that they're acting within the scope of their license and practice discipline, that they know they have the competence to do. So Greg, building official is not going to be going around checking in all likelihood, unless, you know, he finds out that chemical engineer is sealing structural drawings, never took a class on structure.
So an architect can do design, but an engineer can't do architecture.
So there's and it's not the subject matter for today. But there is a difference where in the definitions, and actually an established opinion from the state's attorney general, engineers must work within their discipline, engineering. So let's say you've got a whole building, let's say this town hall is a new project, it's designed, and it turns out that all the drawings are stamped by a PE. No good. No good, because a PE is not authorized to design an entire building. They have disciplines. The electrical probably should have PE stamp, structural, mechanicals, if there's sprinklers, fire protection. But an architect does a whole building. And an architect can actually steal, if he's done the work, the other disciplines as well. But it's not the same way with engineers.
So aren't the engineers relying on manufacturer specifications to do their design work?
So let me tell you what sometimes happens. For instance, when I was the building official in East Hartford, we get these things all the time. These printouts for beams, headers in a house that are for LVLs or I-joists, whatever. And either they're turning in a load table from the manufacturer, contractor, and just circling what they're going to use, or they get an actual printout. So I look at the printout and I see the live load and a dead load and what they factored in. And then I look at a picture of the house online, and I see it's a 2-story house, and they factored in the second floor, but I don't see anything for the attic and the roof for loads. And then you go back to the contractor and you say, is that center wall down the middle of the second floor carrying part of the ceiling of the floor of the attic? Oh yeah. And are those rafters actually resting on just resting against each other on a ridge board, or are there studs going down? Is there a low bearing wall there that's carrying roof? I haven't looked in the attic. I don't know. And then you come about, oh yeah, no, there's a bearing wall up there in the attic too, so we got to factor that. So that's where the information is only as good as the contractor gave lumber, right? And maybe the contractor doesn't really understand what tributary area is, what load paths are, and so he's just getting what he gave to the lumberyard in the way of information, and maybe the lumberyard, doesn't ask all these questions either. Oh. So a lot of times building officials get these printouts, and right on the face of it right away, it starts looking like, this doesn't work. But it's only as good as the information that there was. So this is sort of making sure the building official isn't playing design. Making sure somebody who actually knows what they're looking at is. Section R301.2.4.2 has to do, this section of the code has to do with flood design. Nothing's changed with the basic rules regarding flood design if you're in a flood zone. However, in Connecticut, there are some tweaks to it that are here. For instance, let's say someone's raising their house above the base flood elevation, and maybe they're just doing it voluntarily. Okay, they just see another storm coming someday. Something like Fiona's coming, and I'm not compliant now, but it's an existing house. Grandfather, but I want to pick it up and get out of the mess. Okay, fine, you can do that. So what this basically says is, okay, if you're going to raise the house, and if you're not going to touch anything else on the house, you're just raising it up with a higher foundation. It's up on piles now, elevated structure. The one thing that you have to bring up to current standards would be the connection of that existing house to that new raised structure. So that's going to resist current wind load requirements. Okay, current wind speeds. However, let's say in the course of doing this project, in raising the house, you actually have to remove some sheetrock inside the house. Don't ask me why. Or maybe it has sustained some water damage already from a storm. So, it's a couple of feet worth of wet sheetrock and insulation in the outside walls before the house gets raised. And so we're taking off the bottom 4 feet of sheetrock around the outside wall. Oh. Now we have studs exposed. So it says where the alterations to the structure include exposing the structural framing in any portion of the structure, connectors shall be installed as required to transfer wind loads and other loads prescribed by this chapter, by the current code, that portion of the structure. So even if, you know, even on the whole house, I'm not exposing the studs, but just the bottom half of the first floor walls, or maybe just, you know, in the living room, turn that, I have to take some sheetrock off. Wherever you expose the structure, you now have to bring up the connections, the fastening anchors up to current wind load requirements. Yes?
A lot of houses, seasonal, are exposed to these or they're exposed to rain. A lot. I'm doing it right now.
I guess the structure's exposed, isn't it?
So, but it says, if as part of the alteration, but I don't want to part of it, but
No, you parse words, because that's what we do with the building code. So you're not, if you're not altering those studs, if you have exposed the studs, they're already exposed, then don't touch it.
It's only when it's being elevated.
But you better be able to prove that to the building official.
It's not anytime you're renovating, it's only when you're elevating.
yeah.
Correct. Yep. And then there's another trigger. It says an existing structure shall be reinforced to comply with the structural wind loading requirements for new structures when any of the following occur. When the roof is changed to a steeper pitch, making the roof taller relative to the eave. When an additional story is added to any portion of the structure. Or when the ratio of wall openings to exterior wall length in any story on any side of the building increases by more than 5%. So I'll put more holes in the building. Obviously, that's reducing its capacity for resisting wind. If I'm making the building taller, I'm making a bigger sail. So that's where you'll kick in having to look at and reinforce for wind resistance. The definition of a townhouse is changing in the International Residential Code. So, and if you recall, the International Residential Code applies to one-family dwellings, two-family dwellings, and townhouses. And it doesn't matter how many townhouses. So I can have a string of 100 townhouses in one big structure. That's an IRC. It's a residential code project. Okay. Can't use the International Building Code. So, but a townhouse is changing in definition. Now, a townhouse is going to be the building that contains 3 or more townhouse units. Okay? And a townhouse unit will be a single family dwelling in a townhouse of 3 or more townhouse units that extends from the foundation to the roof, has a yard or public way at not less than 2 sides. So this whole thing now is a townhouse. That whole building. And the individual dwellings are townhouse units. It does make a difference later on in the code when it refers to townhouses. Now we're thinking, oh, it's not the individual dwelling unit, it's the whole building. That's townhouse units in it. And you notice that the definition of townhouse has to be from the ground to the roof, right? So this has nothing to do with stacking units one over the other. If you, let's say, have a building like this where I've got some townhouse units and then I've got units stacked over each other too, this kind of mix, then it's not an IRC building. You're using the International Building Code. Okay. 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses, that's it. And instead, then you have to be open to a public way or yard on at least 2 sides of that unit. Notice it doesn't say how much of it. So, in a typical plan, you might see the entire rear wall, the entire front wall of the townhouse unit exposed. But the reality is, developers these days and architects are all trying to make things denser. And so they start to have townhouses overlapping and these buildings having corners, turning corners. And so how much of an outside wall needs to be exposed to still call it a townhouse and have it fit within the definition of the IRC. That's being debated now in the code change committees for the ICC. At some point, we'll probably see that, because theoretically, maybe only 4 feet of a wall would be exposed if all I needed to meet the minimum code requirements are emergency egress windows out of basements, bedrooms on the back of the house. And so if I stack, one window over another window, how wide is one? 2.5, 3 foot window, need 4 feet of wall, and then I can have another unit overlapping it, and still call it a townhouse by the definition right now. So they're saying with the code, we need to define this better to see for firefighting purposes and other safety reasons, how much exposure is really required. If you've always wanted to build a house out of shipping containers, and believe me, there are some that are very anxious to do this, it is now perfectly possible, because in the 2021 edition of the International Building Code, there's a new section 3115 that describes how you can make a building out of a legitimate intermodal shipping container. As long as it's got a certificate and you know where it originates from, those meet certain standards. All those things you see sitting on ships and outside of Long Beach, they all meet the same standards internationally. So they're a known structural entity. So if somebody wants to take that and turn it into a house or a building, can do that, and we can put certain holes in it. So the rules of the road are there in the International Building Code. So basically what this section is saying is, if you want to use shipping containers to make a residence, have at it, but go to section 3115 of the International Building Code. We're not going to fill up pages at this point. We've got to go by it. Protection of openings in section R301.2.1.2. So the basic rule there says that exterior glazing in buildings located in windborne debris regions shall be protected from windborne debris. And the definition in the code of a windborne debris region says within 1 mile of the coastal mean high water line where the ultimate design wind speed is 130 miles per hour or greater. Well, one of the interesting things over time is that the wind speed maps that are published are changing, and they've actually gone down. Maybe storms have gotten more frequent, and we think that they're stronger, and the storms themselves might be stronger, but the wind load maps, the wind speed maps are diminishing to some extent. So we used to have, currently in the code, from Madison to the Rhode Island border was mapped out as a windborne debris region because of the wind speed. So along the shore there for 1 mile off of the shoreline, or up to I-95, whichever was closer, that was the windborne debris region, and everything either had to have impact resistant glazing on the homes, or you had to put aside, right, have the pre-cut panels and fasteners already on to cover the openings should you hear the hurricanes coming. Well, that goes away. If you weren't aware that this was changing already, in Connecticut, and the appendix that the state uses for every municipality, there will no longer be a town with an ultimate wind speed of 130 miles an hour or greater for residential. Okay, we're talking about the IRC. So no longer will any impact resistant glazing be required anywhere in Connecticut, or to set up those openings for future impact resistance. That won't necessarily be true in the commercial world, because in the commercial world there are 4 levels of risk categories for buildings, and the higher risk categories, I'll give you a perfect example: a hospital or a fire station or a police station. They still may be subject, in some time they are subject to higher ultimate wind speeds that they have to resist. And so for certain types of structures, you may still have to use impact resistant glazing. Yes?
Not really a dumb question, but none of the state is 130 miles per hour. I'm still now getting to have to do all the renovation calculation and everything else.
Yep.
That would be unnecessary.
No, because that's required regardless of wind speed. Yeah. Section 6.10 of the IRC. So, you know, in the middle of the country, they're doing windows. Not just on the shore.
All the houses that we deal with, is it could have last 4 years?
Yeah.
Is it like a student loan, are they gonna get a rebate back for all the money that we spent? I mean, my God, how much money we could add?
Yes. And guess what? If it swings back and the map changes 6 years from now, it'll be back. You know, it just so happens that 130 mile an hour line moved offshore.
College,
That's right.
where the.
They'll still have it in Long Island. You know, if you do work, you design houses or whatever in Long Island, they'll still have it there. Yes.
How does this impact like insurance companies? Yeah. For these impacts?
So you remember that photograph I showed of the big room with all the people there talking about code changes? Insurance people are in that room too. So, and they are part and parcel of the development of wind speed maps. You know, they examine, of course, they examine all this data. So usually what an insurer is going to say is if you comply with the code, unless they know, you know, down in Mississippi or somewhere else where maybe the code is woefully inadequate, so they say no, you know, that's not good enough. But in Connecticut, usually if you comply with the code, you're good.
Yeah, but what will happen is if you put in the wind debris glass, that extra expense, they're going to look at it and they're looking at cost risk ratios, and they're going to say, well, that's mitigating our risk sum. So they may give you a better insurance rate.
Maybe they would.
For having it, but they're not going to say, oh, you have to have it, right? Because they don't have any ground.
Just like, you know, you put sprinklers in the building, it changes your premium. So maybe
For sure.
it should, yeah.
I guess on that, regarding insurance companies, before this change, we say, we're doing the pilot level, to say, have your client or homeowner contact the insurance company directly to make sure that that insurance company specifically is okay with it. I don't know, sometimes just a bag and say we're not okay with it. Now, if this is changing, I would still maybe, as a building or architect, still tell the homeowner to check with their insurance company. Just in case. Right.
Good idea.
Are 3 and 4 families or the IBC are that higher category?
Well, the IBC, I mean, it has a separate chart, separate wind speeds, completely different. And a 3 or 4 family house, I believe that would be risk category 2 in the IBC. And so I don't think there's any risk category 2 structures where impact resistant glazing would be required. It's risk categories 3. Higher level of occupant load of the building or more essential type of structure. Okay, section R302.2, townhouse separation walls. The basic rules have not changed. Connecticut does not require sprinklers in townhouse buildings. So because of that, we require in Connecticut a 2-hour wall separating individual townhouse units. And the code says it goes to the exterior of the building. So that 2-hour wall that you see in the middle there should extend to the back side of the sheathing there. Sometimes builders don't do that. They stop here. They think, oh, well, that's the end of the wall. So what the code is explaining now is you can't do this unless you add blocking. So if I put 2 2-bys in the wall that are in line with that 2-hour separation wall, that fire blocking will now satisfy the code, and you can stop the fire separation wall at the stud line between the 2 units. And if you're aware structurally, national design standards for wood construction indicate that the char rate for wood in general is about 1.5 inches per hour. So theoretically, two buys is giving you 2 hours. There's a little tweak here between in dwelling and garage fire separation. All the basic rules you already know about. 5/8 type X gypsum board being required between the habitable space of the house and the garage. All those are still the same. But there is one exception, is that if you're using in the residential design heavy timber, like post and beam type construction, you get an out of not having to wrap those individual members of posts and the timbers, if they happen to be, let's say, in the wall or in line, separation between the living space and the garage. And so the tweak here is, instead of it saying type 4 construction, which is what heavy timber is called in the International Building Code, it's now going to call it type 4 HT for heavy timber. And that's only because if you're an architect or someone that also deals with the International Building Code, you'll see in the new code that there's now 4 kinds of type 4 construction. There's going to be type 4 A, B, and C, and then type 4 HT. Type 4 HT is the one we've always known. A, B, and C have to do now with mass timber and CLT structures, where they're getting much bigger, taller, and bigger buildings made out of wood. And so that's the types A, B, and C type of wood for that. In section 308, where we talk about glazing and hazardous locations where safety glazing is required, they're making a change in a word so that when it has to do with glazing that's near tubs and showers, instead of it saying facing the tub or shower, it's now going to say adjacent to. So it's not just when you step out of the shower, if I've got a window there, that I have to worry about how high the bottom of the glazing is, how far away it is before I've got to put safety glazing on it. Now it's, I step out of the shower, there's a window here, a window here. If it's adjacent to the tub or shower, the same rules apply. Okay. In section R310, means of egress, we have the same rules we've had regarding emergency escape and rescue openings where they're required. So that hasn't changed. What's being adjusted are the exceptions of where they're required. So the first two we've already known, there's no change there. But number 3 is an addition. And the exception here says a yard shall not be required to open directly into a public way where the yard opens to an unobstructed path from the yard to the public way. Such path shall have a width of not less than 36 inches. So the code says, if I have to escape out of a window, just like if I have to escape out the front door of the house, I have to be able to get to the public way, and which usually is a street or a driveway or something, parking lot, something like that, a public space. So what can happen, especially maybe in more of a townhouse development or zero lot line type developments, where maybe that yard in the back of the unit, if it's enclosed by a fence, or there's exclusive rights to ownership and use of that backyard, maybe theoretically legally on land. I get out the window, I'm in a yard, but to get to the street, I have to cross stuff I don't own, or there's fences in the way. So this is saying you have to, wherever you escape out of a house, including out of windows, you have to be able to get to the public way. There has to be a defined path. So if I have a situation like this, where I may have these landlocked yards, well, someone in the planning is going to have to create this minimum of 3 foot wide access way to get to a public way that has an opening from all these yards. Okay, so somehow, and in most cases, it's never going to be issue on a simple lot that you're building it. But there can be situations where it gets tricky. You say, where do I actually go once I'm in the yard? And you don't have a place to go. They are also modifying the situation for when we have emergency escape rescue openings that are, let's say, out in the basement. So they're underneath a deck or a porch, or they could be, or maybe you want to build a deck. And it turns out, you know, there's a bedroom in that walkout basement that has an emergency escape window, but I want to enlarge my deck. It's now going to be over above that window. What do? So the code tells us, well, you're going to have a minimum of 3 feet in height to basically be able to crawl out from under the deck or porch. And at that window, you're going to need a window well or areaway that's at least 3 feet deep. And if it's more than 44 inches high, that well, then I'm going to need a ladder or steps to get myself up onto that level area to crawl out from under the porch of the deck. So sort of just picture a 3 foot tall, basically. Once you get out that window, you've got to be able to have a clear 3 foot area all the way around to escape. Most of the rules regarding stairs and handrails and such are not changing, but there are some tweaks here. So in 2018 IRC, they made this adjustment with handrail projections. We've always had in the code, you know, you can only project out from the side of the stairway so far with a handrail, and the maximum is 4.5 inches. But now what if I've got this kind of situation where maybe I've got another stair passing by, or I've got a landing, so I've got stairs going down, or this could be the wall, you know, a finished basement where that wall's thicker than the wall above it. And so I've got this sort of shelf there or something. What am I going to do with the handrail? And so it's saying, well, you have projections like that. The code is now going to allow you, if you've got projections to clear, to come out 6.5 inches.
So you get a straight line instead of jog.
Right. So basically that's what you wind up having. If you have an adjacent nosing, you know, that's projecting out. And so now I still have to have the 1.5 inches so I don't bang my knuckles. And now I'm allowed to come out 6.5 inches passing. This just keeps going up. The maximum stair rise between landings. So if we're a straight run of stairs, in the previous code, the code we have now had already increased it from 144 inches to 147. And now it's going to go up again from 147 inches to 154. That's only because, you know, the rooms get bigger and what we're using for floor joists, be it eye joists or floor trusses, are getting deeper. And people want, you know, 9, 10 foot ceiling in the first floor of the house. But then they don't want the intermediate landing for some reason. They just want straight run stairs, and so the code just trying to with that. So with respect to risers, in the code currently, it says open risers are permitted, provided that the opening between treads does not permit the passage of a 4-inch diameter speed. So it's sort of a solid riser, right? So you can't have more than 4.5 inch space, a 4 inch space, sort of. It's got to be a little less than 4 inches on that riser. Somehow you want to have it somewhat full. And there was an exception in the code currently. Exception number 2 says the opening between adjacent treads is not limited on stairs with a total rise of 30 inches or less. So, you know, I've got a deck this far off the ground, 30 inches, say, and I just have a few steps up to it. Well, I could actually have open risers. Or in the house, you know, I come up to a landing, short landing, and I wanted to have open risers for the aesthetics of it. And then, you know, the stairs went higher after that, and I close those off. You can't do that anymore. They're taking that exception out of the code. And they put in that basically you can have open risers like you would normally on spiral stairs, On regular stairs, there will be no open risers even for short ones. So something like this will no longer be allowed, where up to 30 inches, I could have open risers, and then above that, I had to have less than 4 inches. Now it's going to all be this. It's attached to the house, yeah. It's part of the IRC, yeah. Stair nosings. This was added in the 2018 IRC. There's already language we're used to in the code that tells you how consistent your rises and treads have to be, right? How much variation you're allowed, 3/8 of an inch in the flight. There was never any language about, well, what about nosings? And so now this is just adding in that you have to have uniform nosings, and they're using the same 3/8 rule with respect to the nosing projections going up the stairs. In 2015, with the 2015 IRC, we had introduced into the International Residential Code the notion of mezzanine. Just very similar to the language that was already in the International Building Code. So that a mezzanine could be basically an intermediate floor level. Let's say you've got this big room here, and I want to have what we would normally call maybe a loft space, but that occupies no more than a third. It's over no more than a third of the space. And in the building code, I can do that and not call it a story. It wouldn't be the second story of this building; it would just be a mezzanine, part of this story, just another level. That wasn't in the residential code until this last change. So in 2015, they put in language that would allow you to have mezzanines in houses and not call them stories. So I could have a 3-story house and a mezzanine on every floor, so I could have a 6-level house. If zoning would let me have one that tall, but it was only 3 stories if those other 3 levels were actually mezzanines. And then the code said, you still need, a code compliant set of stairs to get out from every level and every floor. However, we're going to allow these alternating tread devices or ship's ladders to be used as another way to access that space. So maybe I've got a back stairway that works for everybody, but here in this family room, I just want to have this little ship's ladder or an alternating tread because it takes up a lot less space. And use that to get up and down into that mezzanine. I can do that as long as I had another way out. Well, now with this code change, it's now going to allow these alternating tread devices and ship ladders to be the means of egress, be the sole means of egress from a loft as long as it does not exceed 200 square feet in area. So this is what we were talking about before the break. These alternating tread devices or ship's ladders. These were things that were already allowed in the building code, the International Building Code, to access like spaces that would need a technical access, service areas. But now they're allowed in the house, and as we said, they can be used as a means of exit, egress from the loft as long as it's no more than 200 square feet. Window fall protection. The rules stay the same, about 24 inches on the inside and 6 feet on the outside. You're above that, but you've got to put in windows that have window opening control devices, right, 4-inch rule. The only thing that's being adjusted in the code is where you measure to. So right now the code says sill, and so that's 2 different locations inside and outside the window. And it may not be, in this case, a little about a quarter of an inch piece of wood here that's like a stop for the sash. So when this is open, the actual clear opening is measured here instead of here. So that's the only change, to the bottom of the opening itself instead of you picking the sill, which can be different in different places. In section R314.2.3, this is the state law that was added because these are always reactions to disasters, right? So in Japan neighborhood in Stanford, oh, what was it now? Maybe 5-6 years ago, you had the grandparents and the grandchildren that died in the middle of the night, fire in the house. And in the investigation that ensued, there was an open building permit. The house was under renovation. And so the wired smoke alarms were disabled, and they're not sure if there were any temporary smoke alarms that were in the house or working. But, you know, it seems pretty clear nobody heard an alarm in that case. So with this law, which they've now put into the building code, so we're all aware of it, says you're renovating a house and you're going to be staying, living in the house. If the smoke alarms have to be disabled, then we need temporary smoke alarms instead of the battery operated to be working. The only thing, the smoke alarm rules, as far as where they would be installed, that's being modified is this situation. If I have a hallway to a bedroom, well, I already know out in the hallway, close to the bedroom doors, I need to have smoke alarms. But if that hallway at the end of it, it opens up to, let's say it's a dining room, family room, or something else, and there's a high ceiling in that space that's at least 24 inches higher than the ceiling in the hallway. Now I need a smoke alarm there too, because smoke can accumulate for a long time in that space before anybody would know going down the hall that there's smoke accumulating in the house. So this kind of situation, maybe there's a hallway there that leads to bedrooms, but it comes off of a very high volume space. Well, up there, good luck having to change out batteries, but up there, you're going to wind up with a smoke alarm in that high ceiling. And then R315.2.3, they've added the same language that applies to temporary smoke alarms, also the temporary carbon monoxide detectors if you're renovating the house. In section R324.5.4, having to do with building integrated photovoltaic systems. So Tesla and other manufacturers are now making roof coverings, roof shingles or roof coverings that double as solar panels. They're not just separate solar panels that are mounted above the roof covering of the house. When it's part of the building itself, then you also need a placard next to the electrical service that's going to say PV to alert firefighters. So something like this will be mounted next to the, because they could look at the house and not pick up on the fact that, oh, that roof is not just shingles, it's electrified. And they need to know that. Here's a new section, R326, habitable attics. So the basic rule in the IBC and the IRC is if I have finished space, if I have space between a floor and a roof or ceiling, it's a story. So we had an unfinished attic, and I want to finish the attic and make it habitable space. They got a permit to do that. I'm turning that 1-story, 2-story house, a 3-story house, now finished the attic, into an additional story. It's another story of this. So what this section is doing is saying, well, let's tweak that a little bit. We'll say that a habitable attic is not a story if you meet certain criteria. And the first one is, how big is that habitable area? If it's no greater than 1/3 of the floor area or below, then it's not a story. It's just a habitable attic. Or if the house has sprinklers, I can go as large as 1/2 of the area of the story below. This isn't how big the attic is, it's how big the finished habitable portion is. And then the rest, you know, could be that unfinished storage space. The space of an attic should be enclosed by a roof assembly, knee walls, and a floor assembly below. So somehow I've got to have a roof above and a floor below. It's an attic, it's got to be an attic. And that the floor of that attic does not extend out beyond the exterior walls of the story level. Okay. If the habitable attic is above the third story of a house, so if I got a 3-story house and then I've got an attic, and I want to finish that attic, well, I better have sprinklers. Because I can't have essentially a 4th level above a 3-story house that's habitable unless the house is sprinklers. So, right? Yeah.
Since you and I both know words have meanings, is there a reason why on the thing of aggregate area, the wording of those two is different? Otherwise, the bottom is saying not greater than 1/2 of the floor area of the story below. Is there a reason there's a different word?
So in other words, you make it bigger if the house has sprinklers. You could-
Right, no, I understand that, but is there a reason why the wording is different? Greater versus more. Yeah, greater versus more, and
Not greater than 1/3 of the floor area of the story below.
yeah, and
Not more or not greater. It's the
yeah,
same
but
thing.
then it's of the floor area of the story below, 1/2 the area of the story below, and it doesn't say the floor area. Is that just?
It's the same thing. I'm sorry, that's me paraphrasing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that you.
Remember, this is not the code. These are my slides.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Got it.
This is not the code. This is the cheap way out. Just look at my slides for the rest of the next 5 years. Yes.
In a habitable attic, where are you calculating the area?
Excellent question. Well, a habitable area is defined, so that hasn't changed. What's habitable? So 7-foot minimum ceiling height. And you have to have a minimum area, I think it's 70 square feet, right? 7 by 10 space, minimum in a house would be considered habitable at that ceiling height.
Your next slide that comes in, 7, that's renovation 1/3 area.
So like here, you know, we're gonna look at the knee walls. It says it has to be enclosed by knee walls or roof ceiling. So maybe I do or I don't have knee walls. And roof and floor. So, and so this may be open to a little bit of interpretation, but basically the finished space that you're gonna call habitable, and that's gonna meet the definition of habitable in the code, that's what you're gonna count.
I believe that the code says that a habitable area, when you've got a sloped roof line like that,
It gives allowance.
starts at the 5-foot line. So if you didn't have that knee wall and you just had the roof sloping all the way down, you would not count the floor area that was from 5 feet
Down to
and less.
3 feet or 2 feet or something like that. Right. Yeah. So here's a little secret for you. It's not really a secret, but like Greenwich is roof.
Okay.
So, right, Greenwich, they have there for residential floor area ratio. So the ratio of your living space in relation, there's a ratio between that and the size of the lot. Okay. And I can tell you that CAD has been a great help to architects that practice in Greenwich, because our clients there, I mean, they want to be within 1/2 square foot of the maximum, right? So, you know, if they're allowed a 3,000 square foot floor area ratio, they want you to give them a living space of 2,999.5 square feet.
Yeah.
And it better work out that way when it's built, because you got to go around and measure the rooms after the marathon. But anyway, they used to, the zoning in Greenwich would not let you basically have attics without it being, if you were maxed out, so you had no more floor area to take, you basically have to design your attics to render them useless. Put trusses up there so nothing could be cut. You'd never be able to put a floor, never be able to make a living space, not have a stair going up there. Well, they changed it not that long ago, the zoning regulations there, so that now per zoning, You can finish an attic as long as the ceiling height is under 7 feet. They don't count it for the floor area. So now I've got, a house with, let's say, 3,500 square feet of floor area, legitimate floor area. And now they've got this attic that's got another 1,000 square feet. But guess what? It's 6'11" and a half in the ceiling. It's pretty usable. Guy's got his office up there, kids are playing up there, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? The building department can't call it habitable. So under the building definition, it's just finished. There's sheetrock and floors and windows and stuff, but skylights, but it's not habitable space. On a plan, it says not habitable. And in zoning, they don't count. So if you've got an issue with the height of your habitable attic, make the ceiling 6'11" and a half. That's all.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
I'm an architect, don't hate me for that.
But you're in good company here, quite a few of them.
But we take major precautions. I do a lot of high ceiling spaces, which I know can be the chimney in the fire.
Yep.
But now I do houses that are much more intimate. Big, some of them 25,000 square feet houses, like a shopping mall.
And into the 25,000 square feet.
And then occasional high ceiling spaces,
Yeah.
like the center core of the house. It seems much safer to do things that way. I've done vaulted ceilings in commercial work, huge hotels around the world. I know that in a fire, that's a disaster. Is that correct? Am I right?
What, high space?
Potential disaster.
Well, possibly. I
Even
mean,
with the sprinklers.
it's a place for plenty of smoke to store itself for a while.
Yeah.
And you're not required, unless you have, the hallway opening into that space that goes to a bedroom, you're not required to have smoke alarms.
Are major hotels safe?
Well, let's not talk about hotels when we're talking about international.
All right, architecturally designed houses, are they safe?
If they meet the building code, that is deemed safe.
Okay.
Legally, that's deemed safe.
It all meets the building code.
There you go, then we're good.
Thank you.
No one's gonna question that.
Yeah, one quick question about sprinkler rate. I do have a situation where I'm gonna get caught by the code change, have a flag. And I have reached out to the water company about a multi-use
13D, yeah.
And they will not allow a single water tap. They need an exterior shut off. And a separate meter for domestic. They will not use the multi-use system. But yet the code is suggesting that as a means to be affordable way to introduce sprinkler. Like, has there been any conversation about forcing the connected water or?
So number one, that's why we don't have, that's one of the reasons we don't have sprinklers in Connecticut, because they can't get past some of the stone walls with water authorities. And there's municipal and regional water authorities, so they all have to get on the same page about this, and they're not. Some will allow, some won't, and also the licensing issues, because by rights, a good old residential plumber, licensed plumber, ought to be able to put in the sprinkler system. But in Connecticut, you have licensing for sprinkler contractors, and it's the same regardless of whether you're putting a sprinkler in a house or you're doing, a Home Depot, same license. So those are the big hurdles to get the sprinklers in Connecticut, besides the Home Builders Association. But plenty of jurisdictions, I guess, haven't worked out elsewhere in the country. Okay, so any other questions about this? So that's a new thing, and out of the way. Swimming pools, I already mentioned that it's coming out of the code. So this section, all it's going to say now is go to the International Swimming Pool and Spa Club. There's nothing for you here in this book to tell you how to build a pool. One thing that may be of interest to you if you are involved in designing swimming pools is that the code is pretty clear. It was vague, and so different jurisdictions did different things. But the code now will be basically pretty specific that a registered design professional will need to seal or certify the structural design of an in-ground pool. Some pool contractors run around, they do the in-ground pools, they've done it the same way they have for 30 years. And they've got that one drawing they always use for the 20 by 40, not deep. And, you know, maybe the engineer is actually dead who seal it the first time. But now that they have the in-ground pools, the structural drawings at least have to be sealed.
That's a question.
Sure.
What about the automatic pool covers with barriers and stuff? Is that gonna happen? Are we gonna?
Oh, yeah.
Do the enclosures can go away?
So that is one of the major changes for pool barriers is if you buy the power safety cover over your pool and it meets the ASTM standard that's required for it to meet for a power safety cover, all of the other barrier requirements go away. Yes. Yep. So I think there'll be a good market for these power safety covers. People used to say, oh, you know, it's another $15,000 or $20,000. It'd be like, well, let's see, the fencing and all that stuff, and alarming my doors. Oh, yeah, no, I'll take the safety cover. Yeah,
So the alarm is still in there then, even with the pool cover?
well,
The pool alarm?
Oh, yeah, it's service.
oh, that stupid thing?
Yeah,
They put the portable pool
That's
alarm?
actually,
Yes.
it's a law.
Because it's a state law. It's not in the code, it's a state law.
State law.
Yeah, so regardless, even though the power safety cover will knock it off and throw it in the water, you still have to pay $50 to buy that stupid thing. and have it. I think some pool contractors have them in their vans and they just leave it there for the final inspection, they come back and take it away, go to the next one. In the structural section of the code, some things are being adjusted. So in the 2015 IRC that we have currently, the change that happened with those is from the 2012 IRC, footing sizes got a little bigger. Especially for like two-story houses or houses that had the additional dead weight of like a veneer, brick or stone veneer on it or something. Footing sizes had gotten big. Come to find out, now, because it always, you know, all these code changes, they're always re-examining things. It turns out that the assumptions that they used for loads on that code change were inaccurate. And so now they're changing it back. So they're going to get smaller, a little smaller again, kind of revert back very close to what it was in the 2012 IRC. So you may pick up a couple inches here and there on your footing sizes. Foundation waterproofing in R46.2. In this section of the code, currently there are 8 types of waterproofing on the exterior foundation wall that are permitted, and 2 of those are going away. They will no longer be approved. That's 6 mil PVC and 6 mil polyethylene sheets. I don't know, you know, I don't recall anybody ever really using that, but I guess maybe somewhere in the country they do. Special inspections of deep foundations. If you don't also live in the International Building Code world, you probably don't know what special inspections are. But there are certain, in Chapter 17 of the IBC, there are certain specific types of structural elements in buildings that are required to have what are called special inspections. And what's so special about it? Well, what's special about it is it's not your local building inspector who's doing it. It's not part of their regular inspections. And it might not be, you know, in the normal course of work that maybe even your structural engineer or your architect would normally be inclined to do, and going out to observe construction. And so for those elements, they wind up hiring usually third-party experts or engineers or people certified in that area, like testing the concrete, checking out wind bracing and things like that, steel structures. The only thing in the International Residential Code that requires a special inspection is what's called deep foundations. You say, well, what's a deep foundation? The definition of deep foundation in the IRC is something that's not a shallow foundation. Why don't you know that? I mean, it says deep, it's not shallow. Okay, so what's a shallow foundation? The definition of a shallow foundation in the IRC is an individual or strip footing a mat foundation, a slab on grade foundation, or a similar foundation element. So it's not necessarily deep, it actually means like different.
So like helical ponds?
There you go, hence my picture. Okay, so you have something that's not basically a strip foundation or a bunch of, you know, square footings, then you're gonna wind up with special inspections. And special inspections of deep foundations, then it says, well, you go to the International Building Code, you follow the rules there for those special inspections. And for like piles and helical piers, the special inspections that are required are continuous. It requires a third party to actually babysit the operation, watch it and document every pile that's driven, every pier that's put in. And this kind of came out of, you know, especially in storm and shoreline areas where maybe they do more in bad soils, piers and piles, where, you know, the building official really doesn't know what should be there or what shouldn't. Maybe a structural engineer has designed it, but he's not out there verifying that that's exactly what the contractor's doing. And he's going deep enough and he's hit refusal, the right bearing soil capacity. So this is to monitor all of that. Okay. So by the way, speaking of helical piers, so what's gotten very popular with decks and smaller structures are things like techno-metal posts. So is there anything in the International Residential Code that tells you how to design it, what the capacity is, how many you need, and if you're going to replace the conventional deck footings with those? No. So that paragraph we looked at in section R301, we're at the bottom in red, they're adding, shall be certified by a registered design professional. You're not going to be able to have just a contractor, that's what they do right now, take their load tables and do the substitution. Oh, we're going to do this many helical piers and give the building officials the data on what they're going to do. No, now it's got to pass through the design professional to check it.
You know, if you ever read their testing reports, very clear in there. So whatever they've been doing in the past, if you read that inspection report, it tells you must have that third party engineer, whether it's in the code or not.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. In chapter 5, section R506.2.3, for vapor retarders under concrete slabs, it's getting thicker. They're replacing the minimum 6 mil with a minimum 10 mil. I'm told, I haven't checked this out myself, but 10 mil is hard to come by. I bet you manufacturers are going to get on board pretty quick and make it available. So in section R507, we're getting more and more information in the IRC about decks. The IRC used to be almost silent about decks, where there wasn't much of any information. Maybe you could figure out the joists for the deck, but that was about it. And gradually over time, they're introducing more and more information. And so you can pretty much build a deck now from the IRC. So we have in section R503.6 now footing sizes for decks. Okay. So this was something that was really just a seat of the pants thing before. Someone sketch out a deck and they'd show, you know, the 8, 10, 12-inch sonotubes, and you'd say, well, how they come up with that? Well, because for the last 20 years I've been building decks and they've never sunk. So I guess that works, you know, because there was no real source of information to go to know how to do that. And it wasn't in the building code, what size ought to be that. But the reality is, in many cases, they were totally inaccurate. You did the calculations. So to avoid you needing a design professional to figure out deck footings, we now have a table. And it goes by, it starts with live or ground snow load. So in Connecticut, we don't have any areas where the snow load is higher than 40 pounds per square foot. And the code requires a live load for people milling around and occupying a deck of 40 pounds per square foot. So we would stay in the top part of this chart, the 40 pounds. And then it asks you for the tributary area. So you have to look at the deck plan and see how much of that deck is going to be carried by the post and therefore that footing. And then you need to know the soil bearing capacity out in the yard. And as you probably know, looking at drawings, a lot of times the assumed soil bearing capacity that architects and engineers will use if they don't have any data is 2,000 PSF, fine. So you might just stay put there unless you know you're on ledge or, you know, you're in muck. But short of that, probably 2,000 will be fine. So now you're able to pick out, not say code compliant footing, but pick out size and put it on the drawing, okay? And as you'll see there, unless you're pretty darn small, you know, a tributary area of 5 to 20 square feet, where you can get away with an 8 or 9 inch diameter, you're going to be up in the higher reaches. So on a size, and they do give you a square foot, and you can see that obviously because you get more area out of a similarly dimensioned square than a circle, that you wind up with a 12 by 12 footing equal to a 14 inch round sonotube. Okay. And the footnotes tell us that interpolation is permitted, extrapolation is not. So I can go between numbers, you know, if I've got a tributary area of 30 square feet here, I can go to the middle here and figure out what's halfway between 9 and 14 and pick that if I want for my diameter, but I can't extrapolate. So I can't go beyond this size of tributary area. If I have to do it, if I'm collecting loads from a greater area of the deck, now that's an engineered act. Can't extrapolate. So here's just a real simple sketch. Let's say I've got a 12 by 12 deck off of the house. I'm going to have two piers, one in each corner. So what's my tributary area going to be? It's going to be half the distance in this direction, half the distance in this direction. So it's 6 by 6, 36 square feet. So if I go back here, 36 square feet, I'm close to 40, maybe I don't want to bother cutting it that fine. So I'm going to put on the plan 14 inch diameter sonotube. Well, that's a far cry from what they might be used to seeing 10 or 12.
And this is new.
This was actually put in the 2018 IRC, but it's new to us. Yeah.
Been using a lot of these precast easy footings.
Bigfoot
And a lot of town, yeah.
And Bigfoot.
With they have their own precast Bigfoot section.
Yeah. Which is fine.
Yeah, no, they're great. They're only 10 inch now. So most every time I use them, I say, yeah, that's great. Even though they want it.
They're lying.
It's supposed to be double.
They're lying.
Yeah, no, yeah.
That's their ignorance, not knowing.
So that's what I'm saying.
Just like the contractor, the thing won't fall. Yeah. Until it falls out. So that's where Bigfoots are getting very popular, because it's all about the bottom. See, and if you look at the thickness, you know, if you're doing a sonotube, how thick is it? Well, I got to go at least 42 inches below grade. Maybe it's a bit up, so I'm, you know, almost a 4-foot piece of sonotube, right? Well, the actual thickness that's required is 6 inches. 6 inches at the bottom. So the post could go all the way down in the ground to 6 inches, or something smaller that's transferring the load to that foot. So that's why the Bigfoots work, where they're small at the top, big at the bottom, because they don't have to be big all the way. Kind of let you use less concrete. Deck posts. We also have in the code a deck post height chart. It tells you the maximum height that you can go based on the species of wood that you're using and the post size and the distances from where the bottom of the post, the wood post, to the other side of the beam or whatever it's connected to. That's the height. Okay. And as you see again, it works with the tributary area. So we're back to looking at the deck plan and seeing how much area of that deck is actually transferring load to that post. And the same thing, interpolation is permitted, extrapolation. We have a deck joist span table that wasn't in the, we have one currently, but what it didn't have and it will have now are cantilever distances as well. So instead of dealing with, you know, fraction, 1/4 or whatever, that goes away and you actually have a joist that can span number that's here now. Okay, and it depends on the size of the joists, what the span of the actual joist itself is, and how far out you cantilever beyond. So, and what they're looking at for joist span, and this is what we normally think about when we talk about joist span is a clear distance between points of bearing, whether it's a beam or a wall. We go to the face of that. In this case, with deck joists, they measure from the ledger to the center of the beam. That's your joist span. And the cantilever span is the center of the beam out to the edge of the rim board or rim joist that you have out here. It's not the actual joist itself. Okay, so it's not a clear distance. In section R507.10, we now have specific requirements about exterior guards, essentially deck guards or guardrails. We had the language in the code that kind of told us when we get to a certain height, 30 inches, now we need a guard, and we had loading requirements for how strong a guard had to be, and that was about it, right? And so it was subject to a lot of different quality guards people would build. Some were kind of floppy, some were real good and stiff, but they're sort of all over the map. So they've been introducing these changes, and this was done really by the North American Deck and Railing Association, the American Wood Council, and a bunch of other people, and Simpson. Simpson engineers are always involved in these things because they like selling connectors and coming up with their solutions for these things. The whole idea is that guards shouldn't just be attached to an exterior joist on a deck, and that's it. I'm going to push on that deck. I have to meet a certain loading requirement, push on that guard. And if I actually were to use the weight that's required to do that, I'm probably going to be twisting that single joist. And doesn't have a load path to take care of it. So the idea now is they're requiring that this get connected to the other joists so that twisting or rotation is resisted. And now the load on that guard, potential load on that guard, is being carried by more than just the exterior joist. So, and this just has to do with exterior guards. So our 507.10.1 on supportive guards, it says where guards are supported on deck framing, guard load shall be transferred to the deck framing with a continuous load path to the deck joists. So you can see what the intent is. They want that load transferred to the joists, plural. Then they have guards supported by the side of deck framing, sort of like on the edge of the deck, that edge joist. Where guards are connected to the interior or exterior side of the deck joist or beam, the joist or beam shall be connected to adjacent joists to prevent rotation of the joist or beam. Connections relying on fasteners in end grain withdrawal are not permitted. And then guards supported on top of deck framing. If I just have a guard post screwed into the deck framing, into the deck boards, where guards are mounted on top of the decking, the guard shall be connected to the deck framing or blocking and installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions to transfer the guard load to the adjacent joists. You can't just rely on the decking to fasten a guard post. And then wood posts and deck guards, if it's a 4x4 post, I can't notch it. No notching in 4x4s. If it's a bigger post, you can notch it. And then the other, if I have plastic composite guards, then I go to section R507.2.2. Basically, you're going to comply with manufacturer's instructions there. And then if you have other guards, aluminum systems, vinyl systems, It says other guards shall be in accordance with manufacturer's instructions or in accordance with accepted engineering principles. So, you know, let's say, well, recently I did a glass rail for somebody on a balcony, but they didn't want the, you know, vinyl or aluminum with, railing or manufactured glass rail infill. They want custom, so wood posts, wood top, wood bottom, and glass in the middle. Well, you're gonna have to have a design professional, basically because that glass has got to take a load. How thick is that glass supposed to be? How does it connect to the structure? How do you make sure the wood is going to deflect the crack glass? Stuff like that. And I just clipped in here so that we kind of appreciate why this is of concern to the construction industry, the code people. It has to do with the loads, because if we look at in the table, what hasn't changed and has been true all along, the minimum required live loads on a guard is a concentrated load of 200 pounds. 200 pounds anywhere along the guard. And then the infill area where balusters might be, or a glass panel or something else, in between the top and bottom rail and the posts, anywhere along there has to be able to take a 50-pound concentrated load. So what happens is, for testing purposes, a safety factor of 2.5 is used. So when they test a guardrail construction or assembly, they test it to a 500-pound concentrated, 2.5 times the requirement. And in that case, they fail. They just plain fail. They crack, they fall off, they pull out the bolts, they fail. So this is really what they're trying to do. On the left column is maybe what we might more commonly see, where posts are attached just to a single joist, or, you know, posts with a fastener, an anchoring flange at the bottom might be just connected to the deck itself, or this post is notched, 4x4 post is notched here. So it can have all the great fasteners at once down here and even connect back to the joist, but if it's a 4x4, it can easily crack here once that load is applied. So this is really what's being intended now, is to connect to adjacent joists with blocking and prevent that last one that you connected to from rotating. Now it's going to transfer the load. When I push against it, I fall against that guard. Now it's going to transfer that load to the adjacent joist as well. Yes?
Can you still do a space B, so you get two-way, like, end joints or something? And the post between them, you will still go.
Well, that would be adjacent joists. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, Simpson has details, and of course, there are bolts and connectors and stuff for this, and they have a connector to transfer the load back into the adjacent joist. And then there's other people who come up with other kind of homemade details. But this is the intention. This is what the code's trying to do. See, when you build a deck and you've got a guard, regardless, you're going to wind up with a lot of blocking on the deck around the edge. Braced walls. The basic rules regarding braced walls are not changing in our 602.10, but there is an adjustment made with the location of braced wall lines. So when we're showing on our plans where the braced wall lines are, we know that we're allowed to have some offsets, right? Where you can have jogs and walls, exterior walls of 4 feet, and I can still call those two walls that are 4 feet apart part of the same braced wall line. I could put a braced wall line between them. I could have it completely offset from one wall to another. And that's where the problem ensues, when you have a completely offset wall. So what the code is changing here, they're going to say now each braced wall line shall be located such that no more than 2/3 of the required braced wall panel length is located on one side of the braced wall. So, like in this basic plan, we're showing the outside walls, perimeter of a house. And we've got braced wall line 1 and 2, and A and B. And what normally happens, like with these offset walls and such, I could offset the theoretical brace wall line off of one wall or another if I needed to. And of course, the idea is the shorter the spacing between these braced wall lines when you go into the tables for required bracing length, the load is going to be less, and therefore the amount of bracing is going to be a little less. So you might be in a situation where if I can take and offset this 4 feet over here and offset this one and this one, maybe I'm getting down where, you know, I just saved myself a braced panel. Well, in this case, with braced wall line 1, we see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 braced panels there and 2 here. So I've got no more than 1/3 on one side. So I'm good. I got 2/3 and 1/3. I'm okay. Over here, now that I'm completely offset from the wall, 100% of my braced panels are offset from the wall. Can't do it. So in this case, I have to have the braced wall line right in line with the wall. So that can change. That's basically now changed 4 feet. That's pretty considerable. Okay. But that's really the only significant change in the wall bracing provisions. Energy code. Oh, we love this. This is what we were all waiting for. Okay. So chapter 11 of the IRC are all of the words that are in the International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC, that have to do with residential. It's just really a copy paste. And so what we see, whenever you look at chapter 11 in the IRC, you'll always see in parentheses another section put there. And all that's doing is it's telling you exactly what paragraph in the IECC, the International Energy Code, this wording is mirrored. Okay, so that's all it's telling you. In case you're more of an international energy code guy, you know where it came from. So, believe it or not, the energy code is getting a little simpler to understand. You have compliance paths that you have to pick, and there are 4 of them. The bottom one here, tropical, we'll drop that one out because that doesn't work with that. So we have 3, right? We have what's called prescriptive, which all that means, the prescriptive compliance option is you simply use the R values and U factors that are in the tables in the book. And if you use those, you're good. That's prescriptive. You do exactly what the code tells you. The other one is total building performance option. And, or I believe in our code now, call it the UA option. Either way, that's the res check option. Res check or similar software, but everybody pretty much uses res check. The government publishes that. That is not prescriptive. So if on your plans you say I've got R such and such in the wall, I got R such and such in the floor, I got R such and such in the attic, and I got these windows, this U factor, and they comply, everything complies. That's prescriptive. And so when sometimes with building departments, and I just looked again this week, just look randomly at some building, you know, they give you the little sheet where they tell you what to submit for a building permit. And there's times when they say turn in the res check. You know, you're not going to get a permit until you turn in a res check. Well, no. You turn in a res check if you don't comply with prescriptive. So the res check is only worth anything worth doing if I can't do what's required in the walls for the ceiling. I got too much glazing. I can't do what I'm required to have on the floor, and I got to make it up elsewhere. That's where the res check comes in. That's the total building performance instead of looking at individual components of the building. And the same thing with the energy rating index option. That's looking at a holistic approach to the whole building. Okay, and there's software for that as well. So now the code will say that on your drawings, you have to specify what option you're doing. So the building official needs to know, what are you doing? If you say prescriptive, then he should not be asking you for a res check. It makes no sense. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Touched it how? Windows? So you took out a window, you put it in compliant. It's prescriptive. Who cares what the rest of the wall is? And the code, it's not a code change, but if you're not aware of it, say you've got a house and you say, oh my God, I got to put R20 in the walls now, they're 2x4s. No, you don't. Chapter 11 of the code says all you have to do on open cavities and existing buildings is fill open cavity. But with what? With whatever you want. If it's 2x4 and it's fiberglass, you put R15 or R13 in there. If the cavity's full, building official can't say anything about it. Okay. That's it. Just fill the cavity. So you shouldn't be doing res checks for like whole house remodel. I mean, unless you're a perfectionist and you want to make sure that what you're doing, you just fill the cavity. There are some additional requirements. So if you follow the prescriptive path, there's optional packages in section N1108. You have to include one of those. If you do the res check option, total building performance, then you can either include one of the packages from section 1108 or the proposed design must have an annual energy cost less than or equal to 95% of the standard reference design. That's in the code. That'll tell you what threshold to meet. And then regarding the energy rating index, that tells you that you must have a score that's at least 5% less than the maximum value that's shown in their table. However, we'll show an adjustment to that below. So here's what's changing for components. So this is prescriptive. Section 1102, table N 1102.1.3, the insulation minimum R values and fenestration requirements by component. So this is prescriptive. This has nothing to do with res check. Our climate zone is climate zone 5. So our fenestration U factor will be 0.3. Skylight 0.55. Ceiling R value R60. 60. Okay. Wood frame walls. I've got 4 options. In the cavity between the studs are 30. So, you want fiberglass, you put in 2x10 studs. Or a couple of rows of 2x6 and 2x4 studs. Or R20 in the stud cavity and R5 continuous. Or R13 in the cavity, R10 continuous. Or nothing in the stud cavity and R20 continuous. This is going to make the mineral wool guys happy. They're going to sell a lot more insulation boards.
It's just fine continuous insulation. Interior, exterior.
As long as it's continuous. Yeah, pick your side. Okay. Floors are 30. Basement walls, there's been adjustment there. So basement walls, it's either R15 continuous or R19 in the stud bays, or R13 in stud bays and 5 continuous.
For condition spacing.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're going to do R30 and 4. And the crawl space has the same requirements as the finished basement. As additional basement.
Is all of this for new construction or remodel? Same R values?
So like I said, if it's a remodel, you fill the cavity. Okay? I mean, if you want to do this, that's voluntary. And you may get to this just because of the size of the cavity you're filling. But this would be for new construction. Doing an addition, new walls, New roof. What's that?
In addition to new, existing block.
Yeah.
Have you ever had something do a rest check in consideration of that?
Oh, yeah.
Keep that, I'm saying, keep that 60 value down.
Well, we're gonna show you a couple of ways to keep it down.
I was wondering if you would take this as a check.
The percentage of the.
Like, requirements,
No, I don't know.
The question.
Yeah,
On that range you were talking about, we go up to the second story.
yeah.
When you get to the rafters, is it R60 or double cabin?
If it's a new roof, it's R60. That's a new roof up there. The existing roof, you can leave it alone, or if you expose, you take ceiling down in the old roof, and there's nothing there, build a cabin. Okay, so ceiling insulation reduction, section N1102.2. If I have a ceiling with an attic above it, where R60 is required, like in Connecticut, in the ceiling or attic, installing R49 over 100% of the ceiling that requires insulation will satisfy the requirement for the R60 as long as it's uncompressed everywhere and it goes out to the exterior face of the wall, goes out over the wall. Okay. And so that roughly looks like the sketch on the right. As long as I get the insulation out over the wall, I can do R49 everywhere, as long as it's not compressed anywhere. So, you know, ductwork, anything that's up there's got to be up above. Or somehow that R49's got to go continuous over. And then ceilings without ends. I've just got, let's say, a rafter bay, cathedral ceilings. If the rafter bays don't allow sufficient space for the required insulation, R30 is acceptable and must go over the top of the wall plate to the outer edge of the plate and not be compressed. But it's limited to 500 square feet or 20% of the total insulated ceiling area, whichever is less. So, if I'm doing an addition on a house, depending on the size, let's say it's either, you know, it's a family room addition, it's going to have a cathedral ceiling in it, and it's either less than 500 square feet or less than 20% of the total ceiling area of the house existing and new together. I got an R30 roof. I can do R30. Okay.
Does proper venting consider compaction?
Yes.
So if the proper venting in, this would be.
Unless you've got a deck. You know, a lot of times people put it just for sort of insurance and lower, but yeah, that's compressive. If I reduce it from the required thickness. So if it's required to be 9 1/4 inches thick, I'm pushing it down to 8 1/2, so compressed. Okay. And as it's noted here, you cannot use these reductions with res check. Res check is its own thing, so you don't get this in addition to whatever you did calculating with res check. Okay. You could factor this in. You could have, I can tell you, I have a house I had to do recently that had the habitable attic. And so because of that, I've got an area where to maintain the venting in the rafter bays and the knee walls coming up. I had a section of roof that could be no more than R19. That's okay. Just do the res check calculation for the house. And between, you know, higher grade windows or some more insulation in the attic elsewhere, you factor all that in and it passes. It passed better than code, even with a section of the roof being R19. So, you know, you get these reductions all the time if you need them. If you lose residence, you're able to balance it out.
Can you start off with and then choose the other?
Oh yeah, sometimes you hit a wall with it, you say, oh, this isn't gonna work, I can't meet the code. Then go to a restaurant, yeah. But if you can meet the code, just prescriptive and just go for it. So on the left here, without an attic, this is what you have to do, not compress the R30 and have it go right down over the wall. Yes?
So can you go back a slide?
Mhm.
So on the ceiling without attic, it says that the insulation must go to the outer edge of the plate.
Yep,
So you can't have blocking on the plate between your rafters.
guess not. I don't
That's not
know.
paraphrasing.
No?
That's not your paraphrase.
No.
Okay.
Well, check the code, make sure it's not, but I don't believe it is. Yeah. So that's why I don't have a block there. Okay, attic hatches and doors. So the prescriptive provisions for insulation levels are mandatory for attic hatches and doors, and they're put in separate sections here. And they've also put in provisions for the pull-down stairs. This applies to everything. So if you're doing res check, or you're doing prescriptive or ERI, it doesn't matter. When it comes to access in the attic, unfinished attics are outside of conditioned space, so you have to follow these rules. And so the basic rules are this. If I've got a wall, let's say I've got a habitable attic or a finished attic. So I got conditioned space here, I've got a wall, and then I've got unfinished attic over here. And I've just got a door. The code has a required minimum size access panel, but either it's that panel or I've got a door between the two. Well, that's fine. What is it? It's just an opening in the thermal envelope. So I don't have to meet the R value of the wall, say it's R20 or something. I don't have to meet that. I have to meet the fenestration U factor for that door. Okay? That's all. So that's not a big hurdle. When I'm in the ceiling, going up to access, whether either it's a panel, an access panel, or a pull down stair, the insulation on this stair assembly, the hatchway has to match what's in the ceiling. So if I've got R49 or R60 everywhere here, that's what this has. So you're going to have some customizing details because I can't find on the market right now anybody that's come up with a brilliant way to get there. They've got, you know, half-hearted attempts. Some have these zipper domes or like R19 or something else that's R20 something, but nobody's gotten up to 49 or 60. So there's some customizing that's going to wind up being done with these things. And baffles are required. So if my thickness of insulation is higher here and this is blown in, so it's stuff that can fall into the opening, I've got to have plywood or something here to baffle it and prevent it from falling in. As far as floor insulation, right, the code requires R30 on a floor that has, let's say, below unconditioned space, like having space over the garage or over an unconditioned basement. The code says now that insulation has to be tight to the top of the floor cabinet. It's got to be tight to the subfloor. A lot of people don't do that, but the code says that's where it's got to be. But that makes for problems putting in piping and ductwork and stuff is kind of compressive. I'll put it somewhere else. So now the code is giving us two other options. The one in the middle is, well, you can put the insulation down at the bottom of the joists and leave the cavity opening at the top to allow for stuff there, mechanicals or whatever. As long as on the perimeter of that floor, we seal it. That's where the red dots are. We seal the joints, the edges, and we put insulation on the perimeter of that floor at the exterior walls. Okay. So that's what you see on the sides. The other option that they're now giving us as well is a combination where I could actually take insulation board and make continuous insulation on the ceiling and then make up the difference of what I need with, let's say, fiberglass or blown in or whatever here on the lower portion of the floor. So if I needed R30, I could do an inch here and get R5. Now I just need R25 here, or 2 inches, R10, and then I only need R20. And then, so that gives you that more space if you're gonna run ducts or piping and things like that. Building air leakage and testing, section N1102.4. Lower door test is still required. And we're still requiring a maximum of 3 air changes per hour in Connecticut. But now they're adding in exceptions for garages and townhouses where field verification can be done. So that can be for garages and townhouses, you can do field inspection. Building officials are applying to do that or have a third party do it instead of lower door test. And also there are now reduced air leakage rates for attached dwellings and buildings or dwellings that are 1,500 square feet or smaller. So for instance, like maybe you're doing an accessory dwelling unit attached to a house. You won't be required to get 3 air changes per hour on that new construction, that addition. There'll be a lower rate that you can achieve, you know, for something that's maybe 1,000 square feet.
Pretty much garage is conditioned, correct?
Yeah. And then there's changes. There's a table, N1102.4.1.1, that's been there for air barrier and insulation installation. And it's kind of educational. You go through that table and actually see where the air barrier is required and where the insulation is required to be. You might learn something you didn't know, but they have actually made it easier to understand. They cleaned up the language in it. And so it's worth looking at. The code does require now for air barriers to be continuous. So, you know, a building official or you, a design professional, should be able to trace out in your building exactly what materials you're using for an air barrier and that they are sealed in between them. Whether it's tape, caulk, whatever it might be, that there's an actual path that shows on that whole thermal envelope an air barrier.
Hey, Greg?
Yeah.
Is that exception for the garages and townhouses taking place of what's in the current code about low-rise buildings?
Low-rise buildings.
Yeah.
So
There's an exception in there for low-rise buildings, the air change per hour, and then it depends on the square footage.
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's still in there.
Yeah, I don't think that's
And
true.
there's no definition for low-rise building or in the building code.
Yeah, the international existing building code. I don't know that the residential, the IRC has anything about low-rise buildings.
There's an exception for it.
In the IRC? And here's a new one, air sealed electrical boxes. So if I've got any boxes for devices, electrical, sound system, whatever, and they're in exterior cable system, whatever, if they're in the exterior wall, they have to be now sealed, tested, and marked for compliance in that thermal envelope. So it's going to be called a NEMA OS4 box. And so you'll either see NEMA OS4 on boxes or OS4, and that'll tell you it's a compliant box, like the wall between the garage and the house. If that's the insulated wall, these are the boxes we use there. Mechanical ventilation, section N1103.6. This, Connecticut has messed with this, and I really don't know how this is going to work itself out. We'll probably need some clarification from them. What they've done is they took one little digit in this thing, but it makes a difference. So it starts out by saying the building's complying with section N110241. Well, buildings complying with that are the prescriptive buildings. They meet all prescriptive requirements and are properly sealed. Then it says shall be provided with ventilation that complies with the requirements of section M1505.4 of the IRC or the IMC as applicable. So what Connecticut changed is in the IRC, the model code, it says section M1505, which is all mechanical ventilation, and you have options. And instead they put M1505.4. And M1505.4 is whole house mechanical ventilation system. Yeah. So, and in that section, it provides a design criteria how you design a whole house ventilation system, what performance it has to meet. So this is going to be interesting to see. Did they really mean to exclude all other kinds of mechanical, just exhaust systems can't be counted, but it's got to be a whole house mechanical ventilation system. You know, outside air being brought in, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know exactly what to tell you on this, but they made a deliberate change here to change that section. Regarding energy rating index compliance, Connecticut is also monkeyed with this. And I don't know if anybody here uses these or HERS ratings, but the bottom line is, depending on the software you're using, you get different answers. They're not all consistent. And so if it were me, I wouldn't bother with them right now until they get their act together. I would stay with prescriptive or res check. But what they did is they eliminated table N1106.6, the maximum energy rating index has been deleted from the Connecticut version of the code because they get different answers from different software. And so they don't think it's reliable. Regarding electrical, chapters 34 through 41 of the IRC, they're going to be printed in the Connecticut book, but they will not apply. They're going to be there for reference only. They will not be the code. Instead, the code is saying all electrical work must be done in accordance with the 2020 National Electrical Code. And there's reasons for that as well, as oftentimes the IRC electrical code is an addition behind the National Electrical Code, produced in 2017 National Electrical Code, and so they don't even actually use the IRC version. And then we have the last appendix that Connecticut adds in the IRC, and that's for all 169 towns. They give the ground snow load, the ultimate wind speed, whether or not it's a hurricane-prone region, which I believe is yes for every town. And I just show 8 towns here, but you get the idea. There's 169 lines in the table. Every town can be different from the one next to it. So you need to check this depending on what town you're applying in. And you've actually survived. Thank you very much.